Hello, and welcome to Painter's Motivating Painters Review video for March 2023. Apologies for the bit of delay getting the video up, and apologies as well if for any technical issues. I'm on holidays and using phone internet, so if I disappear randomly, I'm sure you'll be left in capable hands. So we've got a bunch of lovely submissions this month from new people and returning submitters. So we're going to launch straight in and start off with we have this lovely Forest Defender piece. So it's I'm guessing a 54 millimeter scale. I'm looking for feedback on making it pop a bit more and submitting it into a contest. So first of all, I think it's a really strong piece. It's already very poppy, very rich colors, very vibrant, and very well executed. I really love like the little details, like the texture in the socks and like the box that has that like glowy gem thing. Um, so a couple of things that you might consider. I thought there was a lot of blue up and around the face, which is very well painted, and it's a big thing to change that. But I think the green would probably work better. I think someone already mentioned it, because it's just a better color for her. But also, I think in this piece, when I first saw it, like as a thumbnail, I was like, why is it the Defender of the Forest when it's like she looks like she's on a beach because she's in a bikini and it's very marine blue. Obviously, when I looked at the full thing, you see the base and all that, and it works out much better. And you see her hiking boots. That's a lovely little feature. But I think green should really be the color of her makeup and her hairband thing because it's meant to be like the color that's closest to her heart, whereas the blue looks like kind of very technological, like her cyber arm is blue and her gun and everything, and then even the crystal thing on the box. So that would kind of show us that, like, she likes green. She is choosing to wear that because she, in her heart, she's into nature and that kind of thing. And she has green socks as well, so it just makes sense. You could do the lips in a more natural color as well, like blue lipstick. It's very futury or any kind of like brightly colored lipstick. But as well, I don't know, it's a stylistic thing. And the eyes as well, like the eye makeup. You could make the eyes a very strong blue because obviously people with red hair often have bright blue eyes. Um, Apart from that, I think it really pops a lot. The only issue I'm really seeing is in terms of like focal point, because for me, like the way her legs are positioned, especially in the first photo, it's really drawing your eye into her crotch rather than her face. And the gun is kind of horizontally drawn a line in there. I think it's because the shape of her backpack and everything isn't very coherent, so you don't kind of treat that as a like it doesn't take your eye out. I think in the back view it works a lot better. You've done a line in the NMM diagonally up to her head, and I think that's drawn the eye more towards the head. Like having it in the center of the piece is fine as well. But that's just a point, something you can work on. I think the skin is obviously executed beautifully, but it's just having that really strong light line up there. And then I would suggest, since it already has tons and tons of pop, so if you wanted, instead of adding kind of more splashier elements, you could try and add a little bit more like story and like little features for people to discover. Like you could have like her little buddy who's on her gun could have accidentally like pooped on her gun and it's like dripping inside of it, and you look around inside and it's there. Or you could have like in behind her bits of like a sign that's buried with like something humorous printed on it. Just something, because I think like at first glance, like it's a very eye catching, it's very uh, high end piece. But it'd be nice to have some little features in there, like maybe some very light weathering on the gun to suggest, it is a super bright technological future gun, but she's out in the woods, so it has like blood spatter and things on it in a few places, just like little Easter eggs hidden in there. I think would take it up to an extra notch in terms of judging, because people are definitely gonna um, appreciate it on first glance the way it is now. I'll pass you over to Alan.
Yeah, so looking at this, I think in terms of pop, it's good for that. Realistically, you've got bright colors, saturated colors, high contrast. It's all sort of there in that sort of first pass judging for competition style, where they're just a judging panel might just be walking around the room, and anything that grabs their eye, that's what they're going to look at more intently. You've got eye grabbing colors and things. You're fine for that. So it just comes down to sort of the details when they're looked at closer. So something that's a really big plus for that is the socks. That I've looked at a few versions of this model painted to figure out if that's a texture that you've picked out or if it's painted texture. I'm pretty sure it's painted texture, and that looks really good. Really nice sort of detailing there. It's those sort of small things that matter. Um, Again, similar to what Matt was saying, I'd pick up on the green. On the makeup, you've essentially got between the socks being a similar shade of blue to the blue on the makeup and headband as is on the sort of gun and the backpack thing. It creates a circle of that blue color with that green in the middle. So your eye gets snapped into that green. That's the focal point. You don't see the face on first glance. So just putting the eye up there. I think you're talking about maybe putting a tattoo on. I don't think you need to. I think that that's adding something for the sake of adding something when there's not necessary. I mean, it would depend on the tattoo you chose, but to me, it feels like you're adding something because you feel like you need to put more on there, not because the piece needs it. And it's one of those cases of sometimes the less you put on, the stronger the piece. So unless you've got a really, really, really strong idea for a very sort of on theme and on context sort of tattoo, and you think you can pull the effect off of tattoo under a few layers of skin, slightly faded or whatever, um, on there really, really well because the skin is painted really, really well. I think it would probably detract to have it on there, and because it is such plain skin, not in a poorly painted or plainly painted way, but such a big area of skin that would again draw focus down there. What I think could maybe work in a similar vein of adding more and would be more potentially more appropriate would be if she's got these big sort of hiking boots and is some sort of defender of the forest sort of vibe walking through a forest base. She's going to get muddy, so some weathering of mud on the boots, some mud splatters up the leg. Arnau Lazaro, I think, did a really good example of those sort of mud splatters up the leg and things of this piece, of this model. So possibly something to look at to sort of get an idea of what I mean there in a bit more detail. But I think it's really strong. I think the hair is maybe a weaker area. Could maybe have a little bit more love there, but it's not by no means bad. Could just have a little bit more. At the moment, it looks a little bit less real than the skin and the fabric and the metal. So it could do with maybe just a little bit more of those specular highlights and that sort of more ribbon-like flow to it. But besides that, I think Matt, that's what I'd add to what Matt said. So I think it's a really strong piece, and should be really happy with it. Jim?
Yeah, very good points all round. I'd agree with all. A couple of ones I'd go back to is I think a nice split complementary colour scheme is like bluey greens, yellowy, sort of greeny blues, yellowy greens, and red. So I think to help out with the getting the attention on the face, you could get more red up there. There's not a lot of red everywhere else. There's this little shroom down the bottom, but it's quite low key. Probably done it not to steal too much attention, but to help it out. If you give her like more traditional reddish plump lips and then some red eye makeup, that could help a lot to bring it up here because you've got nice tones of red in the skin already all over, so it's kind of featuring anyway, but it's it's very subtle and sort of lifelike in where they've put it. So obviously lipstick and makeup and stuff is not particularly lifelike, it's an exaggeration, so you could play about with it, but I think that would break up the eyes. Just look a bit washed out because they are blue surrounded by blue, like the eyeshadow. So I think that might be an opportunity. Alex mentioned mud and stuff to bring some more attention to the legs. I think that's a good shout, a really good shout, but you could also do some like little scratches, because she's bounding through, there's twigs and thorns and things like that. So just some very, very subtle things. I'm not talking about a great big, sopping gash that's, sliced a leg open, just some very small scratches. Like directionally, pay attention which way she would be running, which way the leg would be moving. So, there'd be a slight variation to how they're going. That would be a nice way to get some detail in there. I thought generally this is all very high standard stuff, by the way. So I'm nitpicking here, but this is a gorgeously painted piece. I just need to interrupt myself to say that. Then the other thing I noticed, like jumped out a little bit, is Mr. Fox down here. He looks like he's floating a little bit. I think you need to settle him down a little bit into what he's on. Like this front paw here just looks a little bit raised. So like competition stuff, that's that's going to get picked up on. So just settle him down by either build it up around his feet a little bit or push him down. Another hypercritical thing, these green canisters on the back don't look like they've been given the same degree of love. So I get that it's a shadowy side, but it's a metal, and there would be secondary reflections here. So I think you need some like light bands going up the shape of the cylinder. You've done it rather nicely on this side, so you need to leave a shadow. You could leave a shadow there where that is, but then you need to pick up another one from underneath. And where the light hits this one here, would bounce back and hit that one. So those secondary reflections are another thing that will take you really, really far in competitions. But I think you've done a wonderful job on the skin and the textures of the cloths and the metals. The little squirrel dude is outstanding, like the size of that. I mean, the 75mm scale, isn't it? So this thing generally is, not very big at all. Fur on Mr. Fox and the tiny little gem, all glorious, glorious work. So just want to congratulate you. You should be really proud of this, pal. And good luck at contrast, man. I hope it goes well for you. Thank you very much for submitting. We're going to move on. Now, it appears we've lost Matt for now, so we'll just crash on, and hopefully he'll be able to join us again in a bit. So next up is going to be Mac Crawford. So just general critique, mostly focusing on the skin and shadows. Went with true metallics on this, and I think you've done a really, really nice job with the metallics. I think they were the biggest success, to be honest. The way you've weathered it and the way you've highlighted it is all very nice, picking out edges of the axe, leaving rusty and shadow bits. The verdigris on the shield is selling, the way that's been sort of dotted around where water would collect towards the bottoms of things and where it would run down. That's all really nice, so I'm enjoying that. What else did I have on this? On the skin, I think it's going in the right direction. It's good. It's better than a lot of people, I'll be honest. But you're doing really, really nicely in the shadows and the variation in the hues. So we see the reds, we see the purples, we see the sort of, ochre and yellowiness to it. I think it could go further to the highlights. So keep pushing those extreme highlights. The face is a good example of it. There's a little bit up on his nose right at the end here. So you could definitely take this like around the lips and the chin, folds of the nose, creases around the eyes and stuff. You could definitely take all that higher and generally over the musculature, but a lot more sort of gentle, as it were. And the skin does also look a little bit glossy in some of the shots. Not so much in this one, not so much in that one, but this one particularly. So that's gonna throw the eye off if it is that glossy. So give a matte varnish or some Lamia medium or something like that a whirl. Welcome back, Matt, nice to see you. So yeah, that's it for the skin really. The next thing I had was the eyes. So you need a life light in there, right on the iris, on the pupil, sorry. You can cut it across the iris. It doesn't matter if you go over it. It doesn't have to be just in the black. You'll get away with it if it goes to the iris as well. But the whites of the eyes themselves too bright. Try and use like a very, very light grey, like a bluish grey, cold grey, for eyes, and that will then make the it will give you an opportunity then to have a slightly brighter bit, so to give it that sort of wet and a bit of shading in there. But it'll also make the life light stand out. If you do your brightest white in the cornea, and then the life light is white as well, it won't sell as lifelike. It won't sell as well. So always never use your brightest white for the whites of the eyes. Is a good tip. Then moving on to the last thing I had would be, that's a good example of the eyes. So just having a little dab of white in there would really sell that. So yeah, definitely go for that. Then the last thing would be Oh, two things actually. So I think there's too much shadow in the cape. It's a nice travel of colour, but I think there's too much of the deep shadow. So I would broaden out the mid-tones, take away a lot of the shadow, save that very, very dark bit. Because I don't think it's a deliberate pattern. I think this is like shading because you've painted the dark bit in the folds, like in the creases. So I think if you were to extend the mid-tones down to that, I think the highlights are pretty good where they are. You can maybe push them a little. But yeah, it's just way too much shadow in there. And then the final thing, there's more glossiness there on that sword. So yeah, matte this down as well. You can see those reflections in the shadows. The blood spatter, kind of a picky thing, but that is a big heavy axe which would hit somebody very hard in a relatively soft area. So there would be spatter going up there, and there'd be like streaks, there'd be like ribbons of blood. It'd explode a skull, and it would just it'd go everywhere. It wouldn't be sort of this sort of mottled and doubled on here. So this needs to be a bit more explosive, I think. You don't have to go crazy with it, and it has to be like one or two, and then just put some blood for the blood god on a toothbrush and just flick it. Just I'm trying to do it like that. It gives you a really nice random blood spatter effect. If you try and double it on like that, your brain will probably go into a pattern and it won't look natural. So yeah, blood for the blood goth on a toothbrush or on a normal paintbrush. You can just kind of flick it like that. Really good way of doing it. Just be careful not to get it, blue tack the rest of it off if you don't want to get it on the body and stuff. But in general, I think it's a really, really nice piece. And I will now hand you over to the next man, who will be Matt.
Yeah, I think it's a nice bust. For me, the standout parts are the weathering on the helm. I think that looks really nice, and you've got kind of different weathering going out with different bits of metal, and you picked out the craggy expression quite well on him. And when you're doing eyes, the white of the eye, if for a pale person, it's going to be like fractionally lighter than their lightest skin tone. So like the color of my neck is practically as white as the white of my eyes. So that's one way of doing it. You can get your skin highlight and just put like a smidge of white more into it, and that'll look much more naturalistic. That's how portrait painters do it. Yeah, great work. Busts are always fun and challenging. So thanks a million for submitting, and I'll pass you over to Alex.
Not to keep harking on the eyes in the way that everyone has, but the thing that stood out for me there was the whole of the sculpted area for the eyeball is been painted with that white. You don't have that little tiny, essentially recessed shade around the outside as sort of much as it should be. I find the best way to get that, because you want it to be small. Realistically, you want it to be smaller than you're probably able to paint it. I know I can't paint it that fine. So what I tend to do is, and I think what's quite a standard method is, paint the whole of that sculpted eyeball with your darkest skin shadow color, or the darkest skin shadow color for that area. If you've got a shadow side on the back of the model, don't go for that dark. And then try and paint in your the white of the eye color, leaving a little tiny bit of that actual color showing. Just so that if it means dabbing your paint using thinner paint, but dabbing it off on a paper towel so that you've got that perfect control, then that's that's how I do it. But it leaves that little tiny sort of recessed shade around the eyeball that creates that separation. At the moment, it looks almost as though the eyeball is bleeding into the eyelids, which would just sort of clean it up a little bit in that way. Again, I think the weathering on I mean, Matt called out the weathering on the helmet. I think the weathering across the board is quite nice on the metals. You've got it picked out in the right places where water would settle. For the verdigris and for the rust and things, it's quite it's nice. It doesn't look, it's the right sort of tones as well. It's not too bright and orange, it's not too dull sort of verdigris color. It's really nicely done, essentially. I think in general the metals could use a little bit more volumetric highlight, sort of highlights and shadows in that sort of non-metallic style. So toning it down towards sort of shadow areas with washes or glazes of matte paints, just to sort of in a vaguely non-metallic light pattern, just to help it sell more as a light direction. But overall, I think it's a really nice piece. The probably the biggest thing for me moving forward on sort of what you've got here is things like edge highlights and recess shades, just to crisp things up a bit, make it a little bit cleaner in that sense, and help give separation between the areas. But yeah, no, I think it's all sort of moving in that sort of right direction for you. So then we move up to Jonathan. First attempt at sort of Sky-Off NMM was a year ago, and this one sort of looking at True Metallic learning. Solid foundation, putting it into Blender and stuff can be, that's a good way to look at it really. Putting things into ways to make it look like what you want it to look like without that, that can be a really useful method. I think the effect sells well as that sort of heavily reflective sky earth. I think you can do that in non-metallic and true metallic. Either one works. I think it's almost. I think it's each one is quite difficult in any case. I think you've got that down quite well. A nice sort of bright blue color. It sells as a sky reflection, and the lower colors sell as a ground reflection. It has that nice reflected light interference that you'll always hear people talking about as being important with metallics, true metallic and non-metallic. So that's really nice to see. Definitely something that's interesting to work on, I think, for the metallics. Again, like has been picked up before, edge highlights, recess shades, just to create separation at the moment, across, like, for example, the helmet, the flat panels, and then that sort of trim part going down the middle of the helmet almost look like one panel. There's not that much, if you were looking at that from a little bit further away than, a nice zoomed in photo, you wouldn't be able to tell that that's different raised areas. The the chest plate is all very similar tones without much picking it out. It's just creating that separation, creating those individual volumes. You want it to be one volume of material, but individual panels creating that volume need to be clearly seen. But I think it's a nice sort of attempt at the effect, and it works well. You said you weren't sort of as happy with the purple cape and the eye glow. I think, yeah, I can see why on the purple cape it's a bit sort of it doesn't come across selling as a fabric. I think the reason for that is you fall into a quite common trap that people experience with painting fabric, which is you've highlighted all the way up to the top of the curve, and that's your highlight. The rather than, if the light is coming from above, then the top of the fold of the fabric is what's going to catch the light. You've got it highlighted essentially here on the fold of the fabric, at the front of it, as if the light is shining not in front, because then the shadow would be lit as well. But it's not, essentially it's not the right for the material or the light. So you want to highlight across the ridge, right up to, if you've got two pieces of fabric, that's your fold of fabric. You're highlighting not here, you're highlighting it all the way up to here, right up against the shadow of the one above it. It's a similar concept when we talk about muscle islands in painting skin. So that's probably why that doesn't come across as selling well to you, because it doesn't look like the light is right. And it's something that's hard to get right, but our brains instinctively understand, because our entire lives our brains are trained to look at things and know what light looks right, if that makes sense. I like the color palette in general. I think that desaturated look is a little bit similar. The tone of the bone is similar to the tone of the sort of off-white cape part is similar to the tone of the metals, so maybe brightening that up or darkening it down or doing something different there to make it more distinguished would be nice. And the glow on the eyes I don't think is too bad. I think it's not offensive. There's a few things that could make it a stronger glow effect. Paying a bit more, a brighter coloured work, a more fluorescent colour, having a really, really bright eyeball part to really sell that source of light. I think that's missing, and having some cast shadows as well as your cast lights. But I think it's not a bad attempt at a glow effect. I think it's quite a nice piece in general. It sells well for the mood that you're going with. So I wouldn't be too disappointed with it at all. I think it's a really nice piece. Jim?
Yeah, sticking with the eyes, because that was what I was going to say first. I think if you just put a little bit more white in the centres, and then put, as Alex said, the cast shadow, I'd go with underneath his cheekbone here. That would cast a really deep shadow. So just darken this section here, this kind of triangular, like that section there. That would really help it. But I think otherwise that looks pretty cool. Love what you did with the horns. I think you got some great tones going on there. I didn't think the fabric looked too bad, to be honest. There's a little bit too much deep shadow, so I'd like stipple in some more of the mid-tone, where some of the shadows are like around the front, but I thought for the most part it looks okay. For the weathering, on the metal, like this is a good example here, I'd go in with darker tones where these scratches are. So I get that this is like a rust and bit of creeping and grime and stuff, but you can see the example of it right here if I zoom right in. So the top of the damage needs to be darker than the bottom. So just exaggerate this. You don't need to do it everywhere, but just do it some places. Like this one here just looks like a paintbrush has been dragged down it in that direction. It doesn't really respect where runoff would happen from like rust and stuff. So if you wanted to make this damage, there's a better example of it there. So dark line, and then below it a very sharp line. So that would be like pretty much black, and then pretty much your highest silver, because this is all TMM, isn't it? And speaking of TMM, I'd just go around the edge highlighting things a bit more, like around these panels here, like the edges of these spikes, these rivets. Just pick out some more silver bits, like around the belt buckle and stuff, and these panels. It just seems like it's a very dark metal. I know that it's kind of old, battered, rusty, and gone to ruin a little bit, but I think just putting some in, you don't have to do it everywhere, but just make it look like, at some point it was glorious armor and it hasn't gone to 100% ruin. But I think generally it's a very successful attempt at doing the Skyer thing. I think you've taking that reference photo, into consideration. I think you've overlaid it very nicely on this piece. So well done, Jonathan. I will pass you over to Matt next.
Yeah, fair play, Jonathan, for doing that blender trick. I've considered doing it myself in the past, and then I went, then I'd have to learn how to use Blender, and that sounded like work, so I never got around to it. But yeah, I think the Sky Earth works really, really well. I think on the helmet in particular, like you definitely, as Alex said, like you got a really sky kind of azure tone to it. Works great. I think for the parts lower down, like the chest kind of body area, I felt the tone you used for the weathering and the tone you used for the ground reflections were very similar. So, like, it was kind of hard to tell whether it's like, oh, is that meant to be facing the ground? Is that a Sky Earth thing, or is that just that it's aged and it's like rusted and brown or whatever? So you could in the future think about how to kind of combat that. But you've got a lot of stuff going on already in the piece, and I think for what you were aiming for, like it's very successful. So fair play. Okay, next up it's the Witch Bust, correct?
Yeah.
Cool. Looking for, I assume, general feedback, but that's what I wrote down. So this is an absolutely beautiful piece. You should be very, very proud of it. It's it's gorgeous and it's creepy and it's like all kinds of great, to be honest with you. The skin is amazing. I love the way the skin, you've got like kind of the hands look more like gnarled and horrible in the background, even though they're also kind of like they're meant to be fur hands or something. And then the elbows have that like perfect like bright light because they're sticking out towards you. And it's super smooth and creamy, and everything is great about it. I also love how you've added in those colors of like pops of orange and blue around the place, which give it lovely chromatic interest while actually not looking like it's a mostly monochrome piece. And I think you've done a really good job of kind of like interpreting the kind of the art piece that you were going on. Few very minor things I think you could possibly improve is some places you could do with some more occlusion shadow, like on her hip sort of area where her hair or braids have kind of fallen down. Obviously, it's kind of, they're very soft materials. It's kind of hard to think of casting a shadow, but you need some kind of shadow under them because otherwise it looks like the skin is kind of bleeding into it, if that makes sense. Where we can kind of tell they're different materials in real life, so you need to have one of them. I think you have there's an undercut sculpt, so it's quite obvious there. But the other ones you're going to have to paint on, and I know it's nerve wracking when you've got such a beautiful skin tone, but just even something very small you can work in there. Also on the fingers that are like covering the breasts there, I think you could have a much stronger shadow in between them. It looks like the skin, like between the fingers, goes back up to the same kind of mid-tone you have on the fingers themselves, which is very odd. Um, like if you like whenever you put your hand on something, it's going to cast a pretty big shadow, and it gets much deeper in towards the like where the fingers meet together. Um, and in the artwork, you can see like you can't even really see in between the fingers. So like shadow that down a lot more, I think would look more kind of realistic, I suppose. Um, and then a couple of other places like her thong, I guess, is like pressing into her flesh. It's the same kind of thing. You want to kind of show that the skin is like dented in, or there's some sort of change to the curvature there, just with a slight occlusion shadow. But that's very, very minor. And also, I noticed at one point you have like a secondary highlight on her thigh where the light has bounced off the other thigh and hit it. And I thought it was like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in Metro. So, fair play. Thanks a million for submitting. And I'll pass you over to Alex.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really nice piece. Really nice piece. I think for me, the biggest standout is the skin, easily. The sort of how smooth it is, how sort of silky it looks. You've really captured the slight reflectivity, that sort of satin effect of the skin that skin has as a material really, really well. And paid a lot of attention to the volumes. I know a lot of people talk about female skin as being much harder to paint. I definitely find it that way as well. So to have that softness in there while still having quite sort of direct and quite sort of directional highlights and shadows is really nice to see. Um, I think what Matt was saying about some of the occlusion shadows as well definitely holds true though. I think that there's also a few places where things could not necessarily be cleaner. I think it's painted really, really cleanly. Everything is the color it is meant to be. But for example, on where her undergarment meets her thighs, you've got it's almost it looks almost like some highlight color has bled into that recess. So just like a little recess shade, that black lining, and like the bits of fabric and tassels and things going from the waistband. Again, some recess shading along those, just to sort of really define that they are separate volumes. It's almost like that micro occlusion shadow in a sense, if you want to call it that. Um, the other thing for me that sort of stood out as weak, compositionally, is, or not weak but weaker, because there's a lot of to call something weak on this is not to say it's weak, but it's it's a very high it's a very high piece. So is just that sort of headpiece. For me, that's not bright enough. The that bone could be brighter. At the moment, sort of the eye tends to be drawn down to sort of the hip bone and the sort of thigh on camera left, sort of, and the elbows, because they're where you've got really, really bright highlights. You know, pulling the attention up to the face when it's covered like that is really hard. It is naturally going to be in shadow, so you don't need to artificially make it look bright. That won't look right, but the headpiece itself can be brighter to compensate for that. If we look at the actual original artwork from Chris Lovell, the headpiece is almost like a bleach bone, almost a very bright white bone, and that has that effect of bringing the eye up. So I think that maybe the color choice of that sort of older sort of stained antiqued bone look is maybe not quite the right choice for this piece. It feels a little bit less loved as well than the skin. I feel like your goal with this piece was the skin, because that's the part that to me says that's some top end painting. Um, but yeah, I think it's a crazy strong piece. It's literally nitpicking intensely, because this is a piece that could easily go into a competition and do very, very well. So nitpicking is where it's at. Jim?
Applause, man. It's stunning. Great job. Honestly, the first time I picked it up, I was like, this is painting, dude, not photography. Oh, no, it's not a photo of a woman. That skin is just selling absolutely beautifully. The only thing that I can say is there's a tiny bit of a reflection in that shadow under the breast. And as Matt said, just separating a few occlusion shadows, fingers, dangly bits, thong, bruh. Other than that, I've got nothing. I think it's incredible. The way you've sold this bone, I think, is stunning. The texture, differences, colours in the dreads in her hair, amazing. Even down to that scar. Scars are so easy to like completely mess it up, but it's just perfect. I haven't got anything. Sorry, Jamie. Immense. Like, especially when you go to the black and white, just like that could have just been models. Do you know what I mean? That could have just been models, taken a photo, done. Like the hands, the horns, just her skin, especially, just mind blown, man. 9.87 out of 10. Amazing piece. Well done. Congratulations. Please submit again. Love it. Awesome stuff. Okay, we're going to scroll up now to Jose. Finished this gift for a friend. Always wanted to paint it and seems like the perfect excuse. First go at non-metallic metal. I'm very jealous. Lucky for me, there are quite a few references of this model and would like your opinion on it. Yes, there are an awful lot of these, and this is a very nice take on it, and I think you did great. Metal selling 100%. Love that secondary reflection in the blade. The Squiggy's got some lovely travel in the skin. These little pustules on him, you could maybe do another colour on top of that. The brown just looks like it's a bit of a one-trick pony. You could maybe push that a little bit. I love the transition to the underside of him and how that happens on his body and his feet. That's very cool. The OSL, I think, is very successful for the most part. I did have a note on this, actually. Good job keeping it off of the right leg because of the angle of the mushroom. So well done there. The next thing I had was you could pick out the striations in the bone a little bit more, I think. There's some there, but it's sculpted stuff, so you could pick that out a little bit more. I think there was this one particularly. So just a little bit more striations. The teeth, I think, are doing a bit better. There's a blob of red on this one, I just noticed, so fix that. And then moving to the rider, I think that's all selling really nicely. You've got some good reflections on it. You could maybe push the shadows a little bit more. I love the secondary reflection in that leg panel there, though. That's really cool. You could get some skin colour on the knuckles, just like pastel like skin colour, just to give that a little bit more life. Tiny little glaze of red, maybe. But for the most part, I think this is a really successful piece. So just see if I had anything else. Could you maybe get an OSL glow on the side of the left leg? So in here, I can't really tell from the pictures, but the angle of that shroom and the fact that that's in shadow, I think that would be, if it's not there, forgive me, but I just can't see it in the pictures. But yeah. Other than that, really nice take on it. Great job, first metallic metal. That's incredible. Amazing job. Love the texture in the tongue as well. That's really sweet. So, yeah, very, very nice. Nice one, Jose. Matt?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really cool piece. Extremely fun use of color and everything. And obviously, you can tell you enjoyed the process of painting that comes across. And yeah, like it's a well represented piece online, so it has a lot of reference.
Sorry,
that's
excuse
also
me,
a
guys.
challenge because you obviously want to put your own spin on it for your. No, carry on. But yeah, I think it'll stand out from all the other ones I've seen. So fair play. Like it's a really awesome gift. I would be very happy if I was your friend. Alex?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of very strong sort of elements here. I think the NMM sells quite well for a first attempt. It's very, very nice. There's a few areas where it doesn't quite sell. I think that as a really sort of a good example is like the little manacle thing on the Squig's sort of ankle doesn't sell as metallic to me. It sells more like stone, and that's a contrast thing. You've not got as much sort of shadow or reflected sort of colours in there, interference colours. There's a few other places across the model. I think that when you have lots of NMM like that, it's the parts that don't sell stand out quite a lot. You know, if it's just a couple of swords or a few bits of metal dotted around the model, you can get away with it a little bit more. Whereas when it's whole pieces of metal, you need to sort of spend just that little bit more time making sure that everything is to just as good as each other parts. That's not to say that it's bad. I think that as I say, for a first attempt, it's amazing. Um, and I think in general it's very very strong. You know, things like his boots where you've got those reflected colors of the actual squig itself, that's really strong. That's something that a lot of people don't get right for many attempts at painting NMM. So to have that from in there from the get go is really really strong. Um, I think that the skin is almost of the rider is so bright. It works, but it's on the cusp of not working. You know, it's that sort of cliff edge between getting really really bright colors and saturated colors and tumbling away. So I think possibly toning that back a tiny bit would make the piece slightly stronger as a piece, but it definitely is not bad by any stretch of the imagination. I think the yellow is really really nicely painted, going into those orange tones in the shadows. Um, you know, I think it's very very strong. To me, the possibly the weakest element is the base. I like the mushrooms. I like the glow. I think that's really really nice. But besides the mushrooms, you've just got some gravel that's painted black, which is fine if you're going for a very moody sort of OSL, less light is more like kind of look. And it's like a mood piece driven by the light, where the only light on the piece is what's lit by the OSL, and maybe like if it was a character holding a torch lit by that as well and things, because that's what the base is painted to look like. There's no light on there besides what the glow, whereas the model is painted with a universal light. So it's almost like there's a disconnect between the two. It feels almost as though the model and the mushrooms are a separate piece to the base. But again, that's not necessarily a detractor. That's if it were a piece that you're entering in a competition or for display, that would be something that would be picked up on. But as a piece that's, you know, for all intents and purposes, going to go to a friend to sit on their shelf and be something they look at and think, "Damn, this is nice." It's not a bad thing, you know. So it's a really nice piece overall, and something you should be very very happy with. Yeah. Moving up to Tim Dunford, first attempt at a bust, and trying to get better at stippling, sort of volume contrast, and sort of presumably from stippling meaning textures as well. So looking at this, it's a really nice piece. It's very striking. I think the colors of everything are really nice compositionally. It works with that big. It is essentially one big color, but you've not made it one big color. You know, you've got that sort of the red tips to the ears and sort of you know, some slightly more desaturated, almost bluish tones going into the shadows. That's really nice. These sort of pinkish tones, sort of light, sort of pale salmon, sort of into the highlights. It's not one color, you know, for a color, which is nice. Really really good to see. In terms of contrast, I think you've got contrast levels right for the most part. You know, it's you know, take the middle of the chest, that sort of collarbone and neck area though for me, it feels a little bit out of place. In terms of you've got these very very dark shadows, but also highlights that are just as strong as on the face and on the arms. I think what you were going for there was a darker area because it's in shadow from a cast shadow from the head essentially. Um, if that's the case though, it would not go up to as bright a highlight. Um, and those in and if you are going up to those bright highlights, you want to run through the full spectrum of color through those salmon tones that you've got elsewhere, moving up to the highlights rather than going from a shadow color to a bright specular highlight. Um, I also think that there's a few places where you've got very very dark shadows. So like the texture on the skin and his upper lip and sort of that area of the face and the ridges on the cheeks and things, they don't need to be your darkest shadow color. It's something that took me a long time to learn and fully understand. And it's something that you see a lot of people when they move into bust painting. struggling to understand, because on small figures everything is dark shadow, bright highlight to create that contrast and create that separation because it's so small. On this sort of canvas, you want to create volume across the whole, the volume itself. So you've got those dark shadows underneath the chin and things. That's great. You've got deep shadows underneath the cheekbones. That is a darker shadow than the shadow in the ridges of the face. It should be, rather, because those ridges are not as deep as underneath the chin or underneath the cheekbones. So maybe rather than having every single volume go from 1 to 5, you want some of your volumes to go maybe only 3 to 5, or some be only 5 to 3, and things like that, and create a contrast of contrasts, to sort of make it a little bit more realistic and a little bit more lifelike. I think stippling wise, I think that his little cowl thing is really nice. You've got that sort of warm leather effect, quite nicely. That sort of stippled random look, a bit weathered, a bit worn. You could focus more of that stipple towards the top to create a highlight. You've got some areas all the way down that front panel. It's sort of, for all intents and purposes, highlighted in the same way. And things like when you're learning about texture, something that can be useful to remember is there's less texture in the shadows. You've got that to an extent, but it does, we can take that a little bit further. But overall, I think it's for a first bust, it's really nice. We're moving in the right direction. I think the eyes are really nice as well. I didn't mention that before, but they're very striking and draw the attention in. For a first bust, it's moving definitely in the right directions. Definitely some things to improve on that are rooted in painting small figures and going to first time busts. There's nothing that says this is poor painting. It says this is a first bust, So it's definitely a really strong foundation and a really, really strong place to learn from, and look forward to seeing the next one. Jim?
Yes, very, very nice. I like how you've put more sort of contrast in the face to keep the attention up there as opposed to down the bottom. But I do also agree with what Alex said. You have got the islanding going on around the throat and collarbone. So just a second vote for that. I think you could do a little bit more with the rope cord in terms of texture, just to push that up a little bit. What you've done with the leather cowl is sublime, really sells. That's great stuff. The only other thing you could do is do some light scratches across it. It hasn't got any scratches, so that helps to really, really sell leather as well. Then I think I agree with what Alex said about like the creases and stuff, deep shadows in the face. I agree with all that. But the other thing that I think's throwing me a little bit with the face is, on this eye, the glint reflections on the left side of it, and on this eye, the glint reflections on the right side of it. So the lighting in general just seems to be like full on, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing the eyes, make sure that they're the same side of the pupil, whichever side. I don't think it'll matter which side you do it in this case. It would if you had like an extreme lighting situation where it was lit only from one side, kind of like my face is now. So if the light's coming down that way, I would have the highlight here in the top left because it's coming in from that direction. So I don't think it matters for yours, but the only thing I'd really go ahead and change with it to help like snap it right back into selling really, really nicely, the lighting, just put those glints on the same side of the iris. That's about it. Really, really nice for a first bust. It's really, really great stuff. Well done, Tim. Matt?
Yeah, like bust painting is challenging. I think this is really, really nicely done. Like the guy said, the textures are all really lovely. I love the use of colors. It's very playful looking. Like it kind of looks kind of creepy, but also kind of fun. And sometimes it's a matter of kind of like going back and forth when you do a bust where you're like, you kind of paint everything like highlight it up, and then you kind of go, oh, I want to have more shadows, and use your airbrush to just like bring parts of it back down a bit, and like that's all fine. It just takes time, and busts, they're never really done. They're just kind of, you have to stop painting them at some point. I think it looks really cool for your first bust by all measures. It could be. So thanks a million for submitting. Hope to see more from you in the future. Are we on to some Space Marines? Space Marine Eliminators, is
Yes,
that correct?
we are some
Cool.
suppressors or something, I
Yeah,
think.
they are salamanders, is it? Yeah, and you were saying something about the skin. People are going to be triggered by your skin. Well, whatever. No one cares about the lore. If someone gets upset by how you did the skin of your toy soldiers, they can cry about it tonight. It's fine. It's your model. Paint it however way you want. And if they have people worry about that, they've got a very very easy lives. I think the cam pattern on the cloak is really cool. It kind of reminds me of Tetris, though. You know the game. I don't know if that's on purpose or not. It's just the way you've done all the blocks. They look kind of like Tetris blocks falling down. It's like obviously it's digital camo, and with camo you fall in. It's an awkward thing to paint because you want it to be recognizably camo, but not actually a camo pattern because an actual camo pattern would be like hard to look at. I think it works really well. Like it looks like some sort of futury camo. Um, the only thing you have, I like that it's the red and white that's in the environment as well. Like it looks like, oh, that's kind of like building up in their cloaks to make them more camouflaged in there. Um, but I thought the way you've done the scenery, like it's the way the red and white pieces of GW terrain are in there. They're very kind of monotone looking. Like they all look like very like newly painted, whereas the 41st millennium everything's wrecked and like they're literally in ruins. And you're like, why is there no rust on these? Like if they're metal, like they look like girders from like a train track or whatever, which are often painted in those kind of red and white. But then it would get manky from the rain and from the dust, and then all the rivets would have or the screws would have like rust coming out of them, and the paint would be flaking off in places. And because at the moment it looks very like kind of like a toy box again, where it's like because there's such a solid red and white color, it doesn't sell necessarily as parts of the a real environment. They're more like this is a piece of terrain that I put on here on the base. So I think if you just did some weathering on those, um, it would take things up a huge amount and just add an extra layer of kind of like grittiness and realism to it. And also, you can maybe have a bit more central focus on the models, like if you had brighter eye lenses or something, just to draw our eye in to the middle. But I think they look pretty cool. They're as like Space Marine kind of scout, like shooty guys. I like them a lot. Oh,
Yeah. So I think that one, thanks Matt for getting the Tetris theme stuck in my head now for the next 2 hours probably. On the models, I think that there's a lot here. I think saying that you didn't try anything new just to sort of effectively look at an overall point where to progress. I think that's a good thing to do sometimes. Just paint something where everything is within your wheelhouse to be able to look at it and say, this is what I can do. How can I progress? I think it's a really sort of artistically intelligent thing to do. So looking at these and where that can take you, something that I notice is that a lot of your painting seems to be based on sort of layering techniques and sort of thicker, heavier, thicker sort of layers of paint. Not in terms of unthin, thick paint leaving texture, but just in terms of if you thin down your paint a little bit more, use the natural translucency of acrylics as a medium, and created some slight more transitions and more blending, that would be somewhere to look into. Not everyone's preference of style for painting is to have lots and lots and lots and lots of very thin layers. Some people paint like that. Albert Moreto font is the easy example for me, but it's also how I tend to paint. So I've got a preference for encouraging people to do that. But take for example their armor. I think the color palette and the way you've got that sort of saturation in the highlights through sort of incorporating yellows and more sort of lime tones in there is really nice. The light pattern and where you've placed the highlights in that semi non-metallic style that is sort of kind of the in thing at the moment with Space Marine armor is really nice. The if it from the sort of from a distance type photos, um, you know, it sells really really well as a non-metallic style sort of futuristic space metal type of material. When you look at the closer photos and can see the essentially the layer lines where you've gone shadow color, midtone color, highlight color, it breaks that effect. So thinner layers of paint, maybe looking into learning glazing as a technique, and applying that to smooth those transitions and things, would be somewhere to look for it as a progress point. I think that would be a skill that would, yes, glazing as a technique can be quite slow. It adds a significant amount of time to your painting, or it can do, but it would level this up immensely straight away. I think that it would also help on the freehands. They're nice and neat, but you can see where you've used paint that's quite opaque to get the pattern in there in one or maybe two passes. Whereas if you used a thinner paint, it would, and because of that, it's come out a little bit sort of splotchy in points where you can see the color underneath that you've painted over. So using a thinner paint and going for multiple passes to build up that opacity without building up texture would make that look immediately 10 times better, at not 10 times the time investment. So that'd be a really, really nice place to sort of work on. I think that the freehand is nice, it's clean, it's, you've clearly got a steady hand and good brush control. Definitely. It's just those sort of refining the look of it, in terms of making it just that little bit bolder, more opaque. I also think the weapons are as you've got these strong sort of non-metallic style highlights and highlight patterns across the armor. Then you look at the guns and things, and it's one flat black. I'm not saying you need to go all the way and do non-metallic patterns in there, but just some edge highlights just to pick out those panels, separate them so it doesn't look like just one thing, would be really, really nice as a way to build into that. But I think that this is a really strong place to start and a strong place to work from. Really, really nice sort of foundation to become a very, very, very strong painter with not too much extra sort of learning to do. Jim?
Yeah, that was one of the main things that jumped out at me actually was the guns. Quick dry brush with some grey or some silver or something would instantly, we're talking minutes here, improve it 5, 6, 7 times. Also silver, use washes on the silver. Like the metals, they look a little, don't look like they've been washed. There's also a little bit of overspill in a couple of areas, so just cleanliness. I do really like what you've done with the capes. That is a really, really cool way of doing camo. I'm a massive fan of that. Awesome. Like if you wanted to push it, you could just tidy up some of the edges that are a little bit feathery. But if these are for table or whatever, then these look pretty bloody amazing. To be fair. So does the green armor. I think I'd challenge you to edge highlight. Probably is the other things that I've mentioned. You're already capable of doing them, but I reckon edge highlighting is the next thing that you need to really practice and deploy on your minis, because this doesn't have much already, even in some places. So you can do that with the edge of a sharp brush, or you can do it with very, very controlled dry brushing. It works beautifully well. It does leave a bit of texture sometimes, so you will have to go back and fix that. But doing that, I find, is still quicker than just using a brush on every single edge. You know what I mean? But you'd have to do it quite early on in the process. Once everything's sort of put together and you've got all the colours down, but dry brushing is just too messy, really. So yeah, just bear that in mind next time. Start with the armor, and then before you move on to anything else, try very, very light dry brushing of some edges. You have to do it everywhere, but just like the upward ones or like the focal points. Definitely need weathering on the materials that have been used in the environment. I think you did a pretty good job of the lava. You could maybe hot it up a little bit with some more yellow-white just in the centres, but other than that, I think they're pretty successful. And I liked what you did with the freehands, like the variety of the freehands and like where you've placed them and stuff. A lot of effort's gone into that, so yeah, I appreciate that. That's very cool. And then the last thing I probably want to say is like, it looks like there's a bit of like dusting on the feet of this one, but it doesn't look like there's much going on elsewhere. So maybe next time they're in a dusty environment, they're heavy, they kick up a lot of dust, you know, maybe a little bit more weathering to the feet would be a nice touch as well. So yeah, there you go, Pablo. But otherwise, you know, in general, I think they look really good. Nice lighting on the armor and stuff, and I like the palette, the whole thing. So yeah, and the capes are great as well. So nice one, Pablo. Thank you for submitting. Just bear with me while Facebook stops pranging out. Yeah, there we go. We've been reset to the top. Just a sec. Right, here we go. So, David. Hi, beginner painter, started a month ago, and it's my third painted mini. Trying to understand volumetric, highlighting different materials, paint consistency, brush control, blending, all of the good and happy things that you probably shouldn't be worrying about if you're a month in, but this is very impressive that you are. So props to you straight away for that. Just looking for any general feedback that will help. So let's take a look. And for a month in and your third mini, I think all we need to say is bloody stunning. Keep it up. Amazing. Okay, next. Because this is fantastic work for a third mini. Mine didn't look like that, my third mini. Not by a long chalk. So really doing amazing. Really, honestly. So to think things to practice, I think, would be with skin. It's a tough thing. People that have been painting for a long time struggle with it, and it's the islanding. So just watch where you put really deep shadows. So this shadow on the top of his shoulder, that's upward facing, and it's not really that deep of a crease. So it wouldn't be as deep as this shadow. That's the same as like under his, you know, pecs or under his arms or anything. So you don't need to go from your highest highlight to your deepest shadow, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5 everywhere on the skin. There's got to be 1 to 5 across the whole thing, but every section of the skin doesn't have to go from 1 to 5. You know, as Alex said earlier, maybe you saw it, hopefully you did. But, you know, you could go from 1 to 3 or 1 to 2 and then back to a 3 and then back up to a 2 again. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to go 1 to 5, 1 to 5, 1 to 5, you know, all the time. So it's good that you've got this level of contrast and you've got higher highlights in the face in the right places as well. That's really, really nice. Like on the ears, and you've got the fleshy tone in the ears. That's awesome. So just keep practicing that. Smoothness, this literally just comes with every brush stroke that you deploy. You will get better at it. You've done an amazing job of the metals. I can't really say much about those other than just smoothness, just practice. Dry brushing is a good way to get smoothness early on, so do that. Don't not just dry brushing, but like bit of dry brushing, bit of layering, bit of dry brushing, bit of glazing. You know, go back and forth with it. But like blending early on, I use dry brushing a lot for blending. You know, as part of a toolkit. It's not the only thing I use, unless I completely luck out on something, but that's rare. Fantastic light placement on the like the shoe sole metal things. Really, really sells. That's great. With the scratchy texture to the metal, that's really good. You've got some really fine brush strokes as well going on here, so that's all amazing. The red texture is nice as well, like the highlights of this blade. It's all just really, really good. So I don't really have much to criticise, really, for this being your third mini. It's just watch out for the skin islanding and just practice on the blending. And your blends are not bad either. They're really not bad. So, you know, you're going to go places. I can tell already. If this genuinely was your third mini, then I'm really excited for you, because this is really, really stunning stuff. So, yeah, all I can say is well done and keep pushing, man. It looks great. Matt?
Is this the big space robot guy? Or
No,
is
this is the ogre, the green ogre with the red pants.
Okay. Yeah, I think he looks really cool. Like I had to check. I was like, that is your third mini. I don't remember that. I didn't get that from the photo at all. Yeah, it looks really good. I love the gut plate. The way you have like just kind of a sky earth thing. You like got blue and orange, and then you got scratching on it as well. I think the blades look really strong. Yeah, and then I'd say maybe you can work on the skin a little bit more, as Jim has already said, and try and figure out for yourself how you want to do it. You can work in like actual normal skin tones for your highlights. People do sort of a red under color for green skin. There's a lot of different ways you can take on it, but it's great work. And fair play, keep it up, Alex.
Um, yeah, my biggest thing honestly would be the skin in terms of not just in terms of skin islanding, but also like's been said, um, sort of some more color variation in there. You've kind of got dark green to light green, which it almost makes it look. I refer to when people do paint non-human skin tones and don't include variation of color because they think it's a green skin, it's a blue skin, or whatever, as blue man group syndrome, because it just looks like it's been painted face paint of that color or body paint of that color or whatever. Like Matt was just saying there, red underpainting can work for green skins, or just having, you've got that red fleshy tone in the ears that tells us, that essentially suggests to us that he has red blood. Which isn't always a given with fantasy creatures, but you kind of told us that. So reds in the shadows, rouging on the cheeks, things like rouging on the nose, things like that, to just give a little bit more life to the model rather than just a green man. Which it's that's a relatively complex concept, though. It's not something that I would have been thinking about in my first month of painting. But given that this is your first month of painting and that's what you're putting out, apparently it's something that you have to think about. Which is to say that this is a very, very good piece. I think that things like brush control could improve. Again, first month of painting, third model, that's not a bad thing. That's not a negative. That's a thing that I would expect in anyone who has only just started painting. Things like dredge highlights are a bit chunky, and that comes down to learning to understand through time things like paint consistency and training your fingers essentially to have the lightest of touches with a brush. I think on the metals, they're bloody amazing. I think there's too many scratches for my personal taste, but that's a preference thing. I think that to me, metal looks better than when there is a few non-metals, I should say. Well, true metals as well look better when there is a few selectively placed scratches in that sort of less is more sense, because it helps to make it look special rather than just part of what's been painted. It's rather than being added value and added interest. At the moment, it looks like you just went a bit. You got trigger happy with the scratches, but again, that's very minor things. This is a very, very good piece, and just, quite honestly, I really look forward to what you produce in the future. Well done. So moving up now to John Israel. So model from the Infinity line, which straight away is a big shout out to how tiny this model will be in reality, because I believe Infinity are true scale 32mm models most of the time, or in that sort of size range. Looking at dynamic lighting, trying to get it to look like it's coming from her right, sort of our sort of camera left, which is a very, very good way to paint it. I think in general it's the easiest directional light to do, because as English speakers and English readers, other cultures will have a different effect for, but at the very least for us people from the UK and from European languages as well, and from the Americas, where we read words left to right, that's how our brains process things in general, and it's a lot easier for our brains to register things in that direction. So I would always say, unless you have a very specific reason for it, I will always say paint with a directional light left to right. Trying to get a sunset feel for the light, I think you've pulled that off quite well. That nice sort of warm kind of orangey hue to the lighting is really, really nice. It sells that atmosphere well. I think you could maybe have a little bit colder shadows to offset that. You've got that to an extent. The shadow side is generally colder, but that's, I think, because not because you've painted it colder, but because you haven't painted the highlight on, if that makes sense. It's colder by subtraction, not by addition. sort of also looking at trouble painting the shaded side as well, and don't think you pulled it off as well as it could have been. So now looking a bit more generally rather than those sort of broader points there, I think the lighting is really nice. I think it sells really well. I think particularly on the face, you get that really really warm light. And it tracks all the way down. I actually think a really good place for seeing that is that little box thing on the base, because you've got that sort of almost orangey green side and then that bluish green side on the shadows, which I think sells really well. I think the volumes are picked out quite well. We don't really have too much muscle islanding. Could be a bit cleaner on the face and things, and like the eyes could be a little bit sort of neater, but like I say, tiny models if it's Infinity, so not the biggest issue in the world that's going to come down. There's when painting things that small, there is the only answer to making things like the eyes be really really detailed and precise and clean is brush control, which comes with time. There's nothing really to be said besides that on that regard. Um, Looking at the shadow side, I think it does come off not as strongly as the light side. Um, I think that's if you're going for display competition finish, which you said you are, and is a really nice place to put these sorts of effects on. It does mean it comes down to nitpicking. Like I say, I think it could be. I think where you have where it feels like it's not coming across as well is that you've still got similar degrees of contrast as on the light side. So the light side will maybe, for the majority of places you're running from, you know, between three and one and three, 1 and 4, with a few places dipping into those lower shadows on the dark. So you're not running that full gamut, which is good. You don't want to run that full gamut everywhere. On the shadow side, you're still running from maybe your threes down to your fives. So there's still quite a wide range in the shadows. You don't want to just paint it black. That's boring, but even less contrast and more of a vignetted contrast. So higher, maybe only 1 or 2 levels of highlight and shadow on each area that are quite dark, and it's brighter at the top. So maybe the her shoulders and things on the back might be your threes and your fours and maybe some twos in there, and the brightest highlights. Then on lower down her legs, you'll be looking at your fours and your fives as your very very dark shadows. Keeping it colder in general, like I said before, I think it feels colder by subtraction because you've not got the warm light in there. It's not colder because you've shifted the tones to a colder spectrum, which would help it sell as a shadow a bit more. Something like a Payne's Grey or a Abyssal Blue from CL75 is my go-to sort of cold shadow color. Would help to bring that together. And something that can work really really well for shadow sides is, like, for example, you've got these bright pink bits on sort of mechanically glove parts and on the gun at the back there. Make that, if it's a shadow side, it's very very dark on this side, so that can glow as quite a strong OSL only on this side, and that would help sell it as shadow more, and you'd be able to get away with darker shadows there. You said yourself you think that you didn't go dark enough with it. So you can go darker and get away with that and without people saying, "Oh, you've just painted it black," by having a glow there and making the glow on the shadow side the whole point of the shadow side, and make that the focal point of it. So you're creating your interest that way there. But overall, I think it's a really really nice piece. I think you've achieved the atmosphere well. It looks like sunset, and that, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. If you're trying something new and you've achieved it, be bloody happy. It's a great piece. Jim?
Yes, that's very comprehensive feedback. I haven't got much left to add. Given the scale, this is picky, but if you're going to take something this small to competition, then you got to do it. Sadly, the eyes have got to have the dark rim around the irises. The whites of the eyes. Sorry. So the whole thing needs to be framed. I think the whites are too bright as well. So use, as Alex said earlier. Sorry, not Alex. Matt said this earlier. Whatever the highest color was for the skin, the highest highlight, just add a little bit of white to that and use that. I tend to go for something a bit colder, a little bit more of like a cold grey, just a touch in it, so that when you come in and you add the life light into it, like across the pupil, that is the brightest thing in the whole eye. But those two elements have got to be there. But other than that, I think it's very strong. And besides what Alex said, just a little bit of smoothing out here and there would be a nice place to go. But yeah, I think it's selling the sunset thing, and there's great level of detail in it. So well done, John. Matt?
Yeah, it's a really nice piece. I really like. It's kind of got the classic Infinity style, kind of bright feature, but it's a little bit more kind of painterly as well. The way you've done it, it reminds me of it's a short film from Love, Death and Robots called Suits, and it's like about these space truckers. And anyway, you've seen that. It's a similar kind of thing where it's very vibrant but kind of like futuristic, whereas but it's not clinical looking. And I think it definitely sells the scene of like I thought it was like she's like in an aircraft hangar and like the sun is coming in at this angle. So yeah, it totally works, and it's very well painted, and it should sort of stand out a bit in that it's the Infinity style, but not quite. It's your own take on it, and so good luck in competitions, and thanks a million for submitting. I think it's a great piece. Okay, we have Alexis Bonaire with a vampire, if I'm not mistaken. Those Underworlds ones.
Yes.
Very nice piece. Definitely in your style with our reds. I assume it's for your Cursed City army or whatever. And working on the NM as well. I think the NMM works quite well in the frontal view of the model, which obviously when you do NMM and it has a lot of metal on it, as this one does, it can be hard to get it to work from every kind of viewing point. I think the front view works quite well. You got kind of conical shapes in the armor, and that's selling a coherent light situation for me. A few things that aren't quite as reflective looking are, say, like her hip plate things. They're a very awkward shape. It was kind of hard to imagine how that would reflect light because actual armor doesn't have those. And as well, her sword blade that's down and left, so her left hand sword pointing downwards, that looks to me like the light isn't quite right in it. It looks like you kind of rotated the model until the sword was like this, and then you highlighted it all up along as if the light was coming from above, but then she's holding it down like this. So it looks to me like the light should be coming from her left, and I would expect that to be the highlight on her sword to be kind of stretched out a bit more, rather than matching the shape of the sword exactly. I think the value of it looks quite good, and I think the gold non-metallic metal looks very good, very convincing. And then the sword in the back also, I like the way there's like the bright point up towards the top of it. One other thing, it's nice to see these reflected colors in the metals. Like you've got a couple of points where the red is reflected in the steel, but just be careful about where you put those because, like, say, down on her right leg, she has like this red reflection, but the light would be like hitting her, going through the material there. So I don't know how it can't like bounce off it. So you tend to get. I mean, this is realism. So this is a fantasy piece, but where you get kind of reflected colors is when you have a bright color like, and then the light hits it and then bounces up into a shadow area. So that's where you'd expect to see them. And it's obviously in a metallic surface, it's a bit stronger, but you shouldn't have like if it's a shadow, it shouldn't. If the material is in front of it casting a shadow, it can't cast its own color on it because the light's hitting it from the wrong side. If that makes sense. But that's a very very small nitpicky. I think it's good overall, and it's an interesting tone you've gone for in the metals as well. I like that the armor looks a bit more kind of purpley, and the steel of sorts is a bit more bluish color, and I think that was a good idea because it can look a bit too samey otherwise. Alex, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah. So I think reflected colors in the non-metallics are nice. My thing, it's a more advanced sort of take on it. So if you want to ignore it while you're sort of learning, that's fine. But reflected colors are not only affected by the color that's reflecting, but also the color it's reflecting on. So, for example, what I mean by this is you've got reflected red from the like the cloth loinclothy thing going down on the against the sword, and that's a really nice bright red. Then, and that's because it's a white metal, if you want to call it that. It's going to reflect really, really sort of everything as a true reflection, sort of a mirror type reflection. Then the purple infused armor panel up on her shoulder, you've got that reflecting the red just as strongly of the hair. So a purple would reflect red less than a mirror type metal of a sword would. So it's a really sort of nitpicky thing, but it's like I noticed. But at the end of the day, getting reflection colors in there is already quite an advanced thing to do, so that's a good thing to work on in general. I think that as Matt said, I think the gold is the strongest metal you've got on there because it reads the cleanest. I think the armor panels, again, like Matt said, that the reflection points on them can be tidied up a bit. You've got, I think that based on where it looks like the light is coming, there's a little bit of confusion about that from some of the armor panels. They are really complex, really weird shapes though, so that's not the biggest issue. People often think a lot and put a lot of weight on where the reflections go in non-metallics, and however many rules that they say you should follow to make it look realistic and anything like that. The reality is, and the secret that people don't tell you much, is that at the end of the day, there is too much light and too much complexity in light for anyone to understand. I think the only painter who I think truly understands it on another level is Kirill Kaniv, because he does metals where it just genuinely it blows my mind to look at. But the honest answer is, so long as it looks good, you can put your reflections anywhere. The approach that I take is pick a few panels for the armor that you want to look amazing. Essentially your focal point panels, and then follow the rules that people say there are. The volumetric rules. Like a sphere has a highlight at the top, directing the light. Flat panels have highlights and bounce highlights and interference highlights going along the surface, with light collecting furthest from the light source and things like that. Pick the panels that you want to look right and look most focal, and do those according to those rules. Then everything else can be wrong by the rules, so long as it looks cool and fits in with what is implied by the ones that are right, for lack of a better word. And that's kind of what you've done here. Not everything is following the rules, so to speak, but it feels right, for the most part, and that's really, really good. I think that you've got it looks as though you've got an instinctual understanding for how the light should be behaving to sell as metal, which I think is really, really strong. Things like contrast, and you've got heavy shadows in places where I think in general that's kind of your style. From pieces of yours we've seen before, you lean heavy on shadows and lesser on highlights and midtones. I think with metallics you'd need to lean stronger on midtones and highlights to make it sell as a reflective material. So that might be something that makes it a little bit more sort of instinctually difficult, if it's kind of counter to how you tend to like to paint. But overall, I think it sells really well. I like the fabrics. I like the swords, especially. I think those are probably the best bits of non-metallic on there. I think it's a really, really nice piece. Jim?
Yeah, agree with everything that's been said. I think it looks very nice. It's been great to see these come along as you've submitted more and more of them. And I think you're definitely improving with the metals. So just keep pushing with what Alex and Matt have already said. I do agree for the most part. I thought also the red looks very nice in terms of hue and volumetrics. I don't know if you've post edited a bit heavy, and I think there's probably a bit more going on with the red than what we're seeing, just because the black is that black at the back. like the background, and like the base isn't terribly well lit. So I think we're not probably getting the full story, but it looks as if you could maybe push like the values between 3 and 2 in the reds. It looks like it's jumping a little bit from 5, 4, and then kind of a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're up into the 1 values. So maybe if you just steady out the red values, that'd be nice, because I know it's not the same material as the metal, but it seems to be jumping a little bit more abruptly than the metals do. Same for up in the hair. And with the hair, I think you could, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat here. I think with the hair, you could maybe pick out some of the individual strands a little bit more. It also looks a bit more like satin or glossy than the other paint. Maybe that's a deliberate choice to give it kind of that automatic sheen. If so, fine. But yeah, I can see you've got like the nice halo reflections and stuff in the hair. They just look at those look nice. I just think it'd look nice if you had like, so your highlight number 2 to sort of picking out the strands a little bit more often. I think where you've got these like the sheen highlights are really nice. You could broaden them a little bit more maybe on this one. But for the most part, I think this model's a great success, and what you're doing with bringing in these interference colors, bounce reflections and stuff is really, really strong. So yeah, just keep going. The face looks great as well, how you've got this like level of shadow and contrast in it, and it's much brighter like around the eyes. That's really, really cool as well. So thank you, Alexis. Keep going. Submit more, please. Moving on. Facebook's pranged out again. Thank you very much. God damn it, Mark. Got to get on this. Here we are. Mike Kaufman. Glad you found it in the end. Nice one. First submission for the monthly review is Hermes. 75mm, fairly new to the hobby. Would like some frank feedback. Competition level standard. So please let me know your thoughts on the composition and colour, as well as anything else. 2 years in, aiming for competition. Boof, you're well on your way, I would say. This is a very, very, very strong piece. Love the smoothness, love the definition. The colour scheme is very, very cool. I think it's a great triumph, like the secondary reflections, interference colours, all pretty stunning work. Can't say enough good things about what's up here. What's down here, unfortunately, I don't think is doing you much favours in this case. I'm pretty sure from looking at other images of this that I've seen before, I think that's a rock, but the way it's been painted here, it kind of looks a bit like an explosion because of the colours that you've used, but it's not an explosion, I don't think. So it's kind of a little bit like, I looked at this straight away and I was like, oh wow, but then I spent an awful long time looking at this going, what is that? Is it a rock or is it an explosion? And then you've kind of got these like interference colours in the blue armour, so it's clearly yellowing. It's like, is that supposed to be a glow cast from this? And I spent an awful lot of time then going, why and what and how is this? So I kind of deduced a bit later on that I'm pretty sure it's a rock. So I think what would be a really cool thing to do here is change that to like a more kind of greenish or purplish kind of rock, because it's all cyberpunky and fantasy, and that's all lovely jubbly. And then you could bring some of this interference colour. It doesn't really matter where that's coming from. It's coming from the same side. I'm talking about the yellow interference light here. It's all coming from the same side. It's been deployed like beautifully, like in the shadows with occlusion around it, so it's selling. Oh, you could maybe boost this one just here. A little bit more dark shadow around this one. But like how you've done it on the helm and on the backpack thing and on the legs is all stunning. So, sorry, going back to what I was saying, you could then incorporate that yellow glow a little bit into the shadows of the rock itself. This is pretty nitpicky stuff, because this is painted to an incredibly high standard. It's very smooth. And I don't have much pushback really on the rest of it. It's just, like that occlusion that I said earlier. That's pretty much it, mate. It's bloody stunning. I just spent too long wondering what the hell's going on with this rock. And it's not to say you've painted it badly, because you've painted it very, very nicely. It's just the colours for it preying me out a little bit. So yeah, food for thought. If it's supposed to be a red rock, and I'm misreading it, then fine. But just from my perspective, looking at it straight away, blown away by the piece itself, then got distracted with what's going on down there. So, and I think it'd be a lot quicker and easier to change the rock than it would be to change the interference color. Going, oh, I really want a red rock. Maybe I'll change the interference color to something else to avoid the confusion. I think it'd be a lot quicker and easier. And the scheme, like the way that the blue and the yellow colors are interacting with each other on the model is pretty bang on, I'd say. So, I'd say do something with the rock because it's pulling the attention down here for the wrong reasons. But yeah, other than that, I applaud you, man. It's very, very nice indeed. So I shall congratulate you one more time. Well done, and pass you over to Matt, I think.
Yeah, I agree very, very strongly with everything that Jim said. It's a super high-end piece, very impressive. Like, it's a really good idea. If you're putting it in a contest, be like, I have this guy, and he's all done in NMM. It's in space, and he's lovely smoothness. Everything about it's really well done. Apart from that rock, sort that rock out. I was like, because to me it looked like you were going for like a kind of a Mars environment or something like that. But then the rock is really, really orange. But then all the light reflected on him. Like I assume it's like light that hits this desert and bounces up, but it's very yellow. And then the rock looks kind of crystalline as well. Um, and yeah, it's just a lot of. It's a very easy place to up things. Like that doesn't look like it's at the same standard as the rest of the piece. It doesn't have to be as great, but I'd look up kind of desert environments if that's what you're going for. They're usually much less saturated colors. Like there are red deserts, but they're not that orange. Like even Mars itself isn't like that. It's like this rusty kind of tone, and that would work better as well with like our image. Like I'd imagine the way I picture him is he's flying through the air in this kind of desert planet. It's this blue sky, and there's this like yellow light, but then the rock that he's on, it looks like it's from a different setting than he's meant to be in. So that would be the number one thing, just to kick that up a little bit. It's super, super high end work. I know you've been working on it for a really long time. I'm very, very happy with the results that you've gotten. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that's been said. I think there's not too much to say. I think that because it is a very strong piece and a lot's already been covered. I think that some of the golds are possibly a little bit too much shadow to shadow in the ratio of shadow mid-tone highlight, so they don't always sell as metallic as they could in a few places. There's a little bit of gold trim on his sort of thigh, for example. To me, there's not much mid-tone there. It goes shadow highlight. I think it would be nice of us to see a photo of the back of the model as well. For competition. I know there's sometimes jokes about display pieces not having the back painted, and there's some definitely painters out there who do that. For competition, though, they do look at the back and they do judge the back. There was a competition in Australia a couple of months ago, Crimson Brush. They actually did a live stream of the judging, so you could hear it. All three judges said on some models, the back's not painted, therefore it's not getting anything. Therefore it's not getting or the back's not painted. If it was, it would get gold. It isn't, so it gets bronze. I'm not saying that you haven't painted the back. It would be nice for you to show us it so we can see that you've painted it as well, though. I think that the rocks are, like as has been said, everything that's been said on them I agree with. I also think that for competition, having a part of the model that is essentially part of the model, that is a sculpted element that came with the model, just stuck on a base, that's not enough. It would be nice to see some more elements, something more there, just to sort of build on that. For competition, unless it's a bust, even with busts, a lot of the time there's integration of the base. Unless it's a very, very specific model where it makes sense contextually for it to be just stuck on a base. The base is important, and not having a base can detract from the model itself in a way. But besides that, I think it's very, very strong. I don't think there's too much to be said about the model itself, because it's really bloody nice. So well done there, is all I can really say. A few different types of covered metallics. It's hard to pull off successfully as well. So really, really well done. Moving up now, we've got Robin Hagblom. Vampire, cool fantasy moonlight from above, campfire, bonfire outside, below. General feedback, main conundrum is the shoulder pad.
Hang on, Alex. Sorry, have you missed Amy? Have you seen Amy Joesbury's submission there?
Oh, sorry,
Ghost
that's
Rider.
my. Let me refresh my page and see if it's a bit that's gone missing. Yes, there is.
Okay, sweet, cool.
No, yeah, that's fine. Sometimes that happens. Facebook, as you've said, has been playing up the entire day.
Yeah, it's not been great for me today.
On that. So Amy Joesbury, sorry. Submit it for review. High tabletop standard. Don't have a million years to fix every blend. It's fair enough. Put just general sort of feedback on pushing it further. Okay, so I think the biggest success of this is the flames and the, for lack of a better word, hotness of the whole thing. You look at that and it looks really hot, really warm, and that's not just in terms of the colors, but it sells as there being heat on the model around it, not just in terms of glows, but in terms of the way those colors are glowing. Lots of sort of the glows not just being sort of orange, not just being red, having the changes in the color of the glow as it moves further away is really nice, not just fading out. That adds a lot there. It looks like the way that's the OSL in general is fairly successful overall. I think there's a few places where it's less smooth, less successful. The blending could be more, but like you said, if you didn't have forever to do it because it was a commission at essentially a set standard, working to a standard. That's nothing to nitpick on too heavily. I think that it would be nice to see what you could do if it weren't a commission, where you are pushing yourself to your highest standard with no time constraint, or the time constraint of I could go on this for another 4 hours and get very little improvement, sort of that diminishing returns sort of stage. Because what is here and what you've got suggests a very high standard of painting could be achieved. So that'd be really nice to see. I think the metals could be improved. They sort of read not quite as metallic as I think they should for what the model is. When you're painting a model of something super, super recognizable, we've all seen the film. We've all seen how shiny chrome those metals are. I'm not saying go the whole hog of Sky Earth sort of chrome effects, but just a bit brighter, a bit more heavy on the highlights, just to sort of intensify that look would be nice to see. I think the leather's nice. I think the fact that you've gone with a not just black, you've had those bit elements of blue in there, helps sell it a bit more. Although I do think that there could be a bit stronger on the edge highlighting. Leather is quite a reflective, almost glossy material in and of itself, so it could be brighter, a bit more shiny, or a bit more specular. But overall, I think it's a really nice piece. I think the focus draws into the face quite well, even though it's in a sea of red. It picks out quite sharply. I think that there's I think overall it's a very nice piece. Jim?
Yeah, for high tabletop, I think you've nailed it. It looks really, really good. I love the way you've picked out some areas to highlight the chain and not all of it. I think that's a perfect touch. I think being a little bit more on the hypercritical side, you've got these dobs of white in there, and it is correct to have white, where the source of the fire is, but it doesn't turn up everywhere, and where it does turn up is a little bit stark. So I think you could just tidy this up a little bit. Just go back in here with a very soft yellow and just reduce that. And obviously it doesn't appear everywhere, but I don't think it really needs it, to be honest. I still think it's feeling like pretty damn hot flames. The other thing you can do with the flames is just darken it right towards the very tip, with like a really deep red and then black on the very, very tip, so it looks like it's kind of flapping a bit of soot. A very, very, very small amount. I think that's the only thing you could really push it with for high tabletop. The base is very nice as well. I like the effort that you've gone to on the brick and the stone. Or like the asphalt or whatever it is that he's riding on. It's very cool. You can maybe add some more like detritus-y type things, but I don't think it's massively necessary. It does look very clean. Looks like a very clean street that's got litter. Like it just there's a slight disparity there. So yeah, just maybe grubbing it up a little bit somehow. But it's a minor thing. I think for the most part, it's a triumph. So well done, Amy. Matt.
So I'm gonna disagree with Alex and say not everyone has seen the Ghost Rider film. This is it's a really good piece. I think for high tabletop, you're like, hey, look, I'm doing non-metallic metal and source lighting and putting them together. Cool. Everyone is going to look at that and go, that's a really sweet model on table. Fair play. Even attempting those things, and they pulled off to a very nice standard. I think the base looks very nice. It looks very like a comic book street. I like the little elements that are there. It's not necessarily super realistic or whatever, but it looks like I can imagine that being in a Ghost Rider comic that he's going down the street. And I love the way you've done the little bricks and stuff on it. And yeah, the color palette and everything on it, like it looks great. It's a really strong piece, and I like it a lot. So hope that's helpful. Thanks a million for submitting. Robin Haglum with a vampire. Is that correct? On a pillar.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's always me that gets Robin. That's why I was like, yeah, how did this not happen? But this is a really cool looking piece. I think it absolutely sells the idea that it's creeping up on someone. And there's a campfire and it's being illuminated. It's a really good piece for that because it's crawling down this pillar thing. I think the way you've done the lighting is very effective. It's stronger down kind of where the skull is and stuff, and then we can see it lighting the vampire underneath. I think the vampire's face looks really, really good. It's got this kind of punk rock aesthetic to it, which I guess the model always has like a mohawk, but like the way you've done scar on its face and everything looks like it's at a gig. And then the big question is the NMM and then the kind of colors in the back. So yeah, I think that the red armor is a better choice color-wise. I think that with the all silver version of it, the steel NMM, the vampire skin, because it's under this blue lighting and it's very reflective, and it kind of it doesn't look as interesting. Whereas the red kind of half moon around its face really draws focus up there. You can almost, and you can kind of see the red in the cheeks. I think you've worked a little bit of that in there as well. I think that the way you painted the steel, like you painted it better, if that makes sense. It looks like you put more effort into that. It's definitely more non-metallic looking. Although I find it kind of strange that there's no like orange like bounce light from the fire. Like it seems like all the panels that are facing down in that armor, the primary light is the fire. So it should be basically orange on the lower panels. That might have helped the whole framing issue, but I think having the red there is just a better choice compositionally. And I don't think it has to be super shiny looking because like it looks like it's armor that's painted red, if that makes sense. So I think it's looking pretty good. You could maybe up the reflectivity of it a little bit, maybe actually add some of that OSL onto the red as well. Because you've shown that actually the underneath of the arm that's right beside it has the OSL cast up onto it. So the metal would have to. If you want a good video, I know like obviously doing reflected light onto a colored metal is quite tricky. Sammy Alonso Torrent, you have any idea who that is? I'll put a link in the description. He's a Spanish guy, but he does a video of he paints a blood angel and there's like lightning. So he has like the armor has to go from red to like black to then blue. So it has like blue actual reflections on it, and it works really effectively. It's based on an artwork by Raymond Swanland, I think. I'll put the link somewhere for you. So that'd be a good shape if you wanted to be a very shiny steel that is still red. And then the random colors on the back I think look really good. like, because you're saying like it's not very well lit, it's in shadows. There's probably a few bits that the moonlight would get at, but I think it's more effective saying like, well, the beast cast a shadow in that whole section, and having random bits of color in there. It's a really good way of showing us like, oh, it's dark, but there's still stuff going on because your eye would pick out something in reality when you focus on the shadows. I was thinking there's a little bit of an opportunity to have a bit of like interest there in that he's got like shaggy legs, and you could have like transmitted light being going through there like that. When you shine a light on like a curtain or whatever, or like any kind of fabric like that, you'll see it will light up and kind of glow. If you've seen The Witcher season 2, there's that beast guy, and he's always lit from behind. You can see the firelight shining in his hair. So you can have the same kind of thing there, but then you'd be lighting up the beast's crotch. So I'm not sure if that's what you're going for, but that's just something. If you wanted to have a point of interest on the rear view, that's a way you could do it, because the light's all coming from the opposite side, but it would kind of illuminate the hair fibers from inside. If that makes I think it's a super cool looking piece. I really really love it. So I'll pass you over to Alex to see if there's any further feedback.
No, there isn't. You were very, very comprehensive. All I'll say is I like it a lot. You've definitely achieved a moonlight feel. I think the glow from the sort of campfire-esque glow helps to sell it as well. Really helps to reinforce that. I don't think it needs it. If I cover that up, it still looks moonlit. But that helps even more to sell it. And red is better for the framing, definitely. I think what you were saying about feeling like it doesn't sell as well as a piece of metal. Yeah, it doesn't need to, not necessarily, but it helped for it to. Yeah, and that can come around to a few different ways of achieving that through increasing the contrast, which is what I think it is not increasing the contrast, but shifting again that ratio between shadow, highlight, midtone is quite shadow heavy at the moment. So having a bit more midtone in there and some slightly more cold infused highlights would really help that. There's a few different ways to achieve that. I remember, I think it was Ben Comments did a red non-metallic, very very effective one where he just did it in black and white and then used red glazes to then make it look red. Essentially painting steel. If you feel more comfortable painting steel because you in your own words, red to you feels a bit more cartoony, then paint a steel and then glaze it red. Steel is a neutral non-metallic. But overall, I think it's a really really nice piece. So, Jim.
Yeah, I think the red is the right choice as well. And with what you're saying about just brightening it, the fire side. So where the light comes up, make this bit brighter than that's up here. Sort of mute this down, as that's not really exposed to the fire. I think that'd be the way to go. Love the whole piece in general. Definitely selling the OSL and the whole 2 lighting source thing. I thought that the highlights on the blades were a bit too choppy for this sort of light setting. I think if you broadened these out and smoothed them, it would sell a little bit better for that light source, to be honest, because it's very sort of soft diffused light. It just looks like a lot of bouncing going on the blade. I think if you see you got like 4 highlights across the top, I think if you knock that back to 2 and made them a lot broader and smoother, it would help it sell a little bit. And then the only other thing I had was I think you're missing a bit of glow on this thigh here. It might be the picture, so forgive me if it is, but there seems to be a lot more sort of OSL going on sort of up the face, which is, I think, probably further away than what that knee is. Slightly. Do you see what I mean? How bright it is on this knee, and then the inside of this thigh, I think, is facing directly at it. I think you could boost the OSL cast on it's even getting all the way up here on the underside of this arm. So you're telling us, I think we're missing a little bit here. And indeed, if it's getting that far, it needs to be. Well, it is on the sword there actually, but I think that needs to be not so yellow. I think that needs to be sort of more in this sort of ruddy orange kind of spectrum. I know that that's brighter and it would have reflected more, but I don't think it'd be that bright. It looks a bit harsh. But sort of general deployment of the lighting on it is a great success. I think Beautiful transitions. Love what you did with the face, having the glowing red eyes. That's a fantastic choice. And there's 100% down here, like the shadows and the lighting getting hotter and hotter as you get towards the front of the base is all great success. So lovely stuff, Robin. Thank you very much for submitting. Please come again and bring your friends. And then the last one is Mark. Behave yourself, Facebook. Here we go. Mark Villacube, trying to progress more into display painting, looking for general feedback. I feel the crow is the weakest point of the bust. There's a lot of flat surfaces on the crow, and I would appreciate tips there. Okay. Generally, I think this is a very, very clean and crisp and very nicely laid out piece. There's a lot of colour. Yes, there's a lot of trim, but I think you've treated it all with the same amount of attention and detail everywhere. So you've spaced it all out very, very nicely, these colours, and separated things very nicely. That's all very good. I think you could take the highlights in the face a little bit further, just to keep the attention over here. The eyes are very, very nice, the way that you've done those, very bright and bold blue. So you'll keep it, it's tough to keep attention, on something this big when there's so many other elements and colours to look at. But, I think this broad area of the head is keeping the attention quite well. So well done there. I think with the horns, you could maybe smooth them a little bit, like where the sort of segments of the bone are. I think you could define those a little bit better in a couple of places. So like where they meet the head, that could be a bit darker. And then this line here on this left horn, just darken that a little bit. But it's great that you've put these colours and these textures in there. That's really cool. There's little micro textures on. I'm not sure what that material is, but it's a material, and you're telling me there's texture, and I think you've done very nice. The gold is very smooth and definitely sells. You could maybe push specular highlights a little bit further in some places, like down where the bands of the highlight are. You could maybe push those a little bit higher. Let's have a look at the back. So with these gemmy ruby type things, I think the purple ones look better. This one in particular is the best, and the reason for that is because it goes all the way to black, very, very dark black, and then the specular warmth is really strongly contrast. I mean, this one does go darker, but not as dark. This purple one here that's on the front doesn't go anywhere near as dark. So continue to push the darkness in those gemstone ruby type things. Same on this one. To copy what you did on, where is he? This one. That one looks really, really nice. And like this cross highlight that you've got going on at the bottom there. Mwah, beautiful stuff. So that's very, very cool. I think you could add a bit more texture on the green fabric that's on the back. You know how to do it. You've done it everywhere else. So just a little bit more focus there. I get that it's the back. Yeah, it's not quite as important. But then onto the crow. Thing that twanged me first about crow is, why does he have orange feet and why does he have an orange beak? Because they're black. They're all black. So maybe that's why. It's a very bright, bold orange. So maybe try painting him with like grayer beak and feet, perhaps. I think maybe that's why it's looking a bit weird, because it doesn't look like, I mean, I'm not an expert in birds at all, but I don't know of any crows that have orange bits on them. But what you've done with the feathers, I think, is quite nice. You could keep going, but the way you've done it, I think is fine. You could maybe like try and glaze like a grayer colour towards like the middle of the feathers to give it like a sheen, and then that would give you sort of more contrast to the feathers, because you're reserving the black for like right under the ruffles of the feathers. It could be a shout, but on the whole, I think the bird in general looks pretty decent, man. I don't think there's much wrong with the bird. You could add a few more lines maybe to the underside here where it's shadowed, not quite as bright and not quite as many, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, if you're going for like the fantasy crow with its own colour scheme, then absolutely fine. But that's what, I noticed about the bird was just the orange. Did I have anything else? You could play some deeper shadows selectively in the face. Was the only other thing I had. So like where some of these ruffles and rolls are on him, just push the shadows a little bit deeper on those, just to kind of bring the structure of his face out a little bit more. So I said also earlier with the highlights, maybe do the highlights first, see how that makes it look, and then maybe push some more shadows around. But on the whole, yeah, really nice bust. Great stuff. I love what you've done with this. It's a riot of colour, but it's resolving and settling down very, very nicely overall. So yeah, good stuff. Thank you, Mark. Matt?
Yeah, it's a really cool looking piece. I really like the main purple gem. I think that's an interesting take on, there's kind of stock ways of doing gems, and you have a little bit of your own take on it. In terms of the bird, I'd look, if you're doing display stuff and you want to be serious about it, I'd look at reference images. Like crows have, there's a million types of crows, but you're gonna have to paint in. It's kind of like painting hair, but it's different because they're feathers and kind of plates or sheets, but they have a reflection pattern to them, so they'll have kind of like an area where it's all highlight, and then it'll have scratchy stuff. It looks like you're trying to paint texture on kind of directly. Also, crows often have different color patterns. Like a magpie has very dark purple and very dark green and blue and stuff in their feathers, and that'll make it a lot easier for you. If it's just black, it tends to look kind of boring. And I'm sure there's tons and tons of reference images for crows, but again, that's maybe more of a big deal if you want to do a bust that is of a crow. Maybe for this piece, just fading out. If you had just kind of glaze over those your texture marks with a slightly darker color, or the same color, just very faintly, to make it look like there's kind of a build up of light, and then the individual feathers being highlighted. That would probably do the job for you. But he's a cool looking piece. I really like the color choices, and it's not kind of easily been kind of garish, but I think you picked really nice kind of sort of tending toward neutral versions of a lot of colors, and it's harmonious and cool looking. Alex?
Yeah, so looking at this piece with the lens of moving towards display painting, I think a big plus of it is that in spite of how much color there is, it reads cleanly. Compositionally, you've got that understood in terms of rings of color, circles of color, shapes that create focus in the way that the color is placed. Between the as an example, between the chest plate, the shoulder plates, and his sort of belt and the bottles on the belt, and his sort of face, you've got a cross of red with the face in the middle of that, and that creates a focal point on the face through compositional shape. There's the eyes being that blue. It's the same blue as the feathers around his face. You've got a ring of that blue framing the face, and then that blue inside it is like a bullseye of that circle. That creates a really, really strong focal point in terms of the composition. Compositionally, this piece is really, really strong. There's a lot that could be said on it as, quite complex compositional elements executed, whether you are thinking about them or not. If you weren't, even better, you've got an instinctual understanding for it. If you were thinking about it, it pulled off very, very well. For me, I think that in general, smoothing of the colors and the blends is something that is an area for improvement. For display painting, use of texture and use of non-blending, for lack of a better word, is an intentional choice. Whereas it looks like at the moment your main highlighting and shading application method is through layers of opaque paint. For example, on the gems, you can see quite distinct bands of color. So I think smoothing that out and being more intentional with where things aren't smooth would be a point moving forward. Because especially at this scale, you can't really get away with layering as a technique unless you're doing dozens and dozens and dozens of layers where the change in hue and value between each layer is super small, that it almost blends in on its own by the eye. People like Flamion, I can't remember his actual name, but Flamion Miniatures on Instagram does paint like that with loads of fully opaque layers, but the tiniest of brush strokes. So it's a valid method. So either more layers with intermediary colors, or thinner layers to create transitions, and again more of them in that case as well. I am not fully sold personally as a taste of personal preference on the way that you've done the gems with those really big glint highlights and the stars and things. I think on a small scale, I'd be sold on it 100%. At this scale, I think that it's cartoony, and that's a good. That can be a good thing. But I think at this scale, if you're going to go cartoony with one element, you need to go all in on it across the board and make everything look kind of hyper stylized to get away with it. That again, that's not a critique; it's more of a personal preference thing. But I feel it's worth mentioning. I think the gold, you've got the highlights and stuff are in the right places. It looks metallic, but it looks burnished. So if you're going for that look, it's spot on. If you're going for a more metallic, shiny metallic look, just a little bit more contrast in places, a bit more specular highlighting. But overall, I think it's a really nice piece with a few small things that could push towards display painting. And things that again as is often the case with display painting, will add potentially a significant amount of time to the process. But display painting is a labor of love, and it's where you put in a lot of time on the first few ones you do it, and then you start learning the efficiencies that work for you. But yeah, I think it's a really strong, solid base point to dive into display painting and go and deep dive on everything you can learn about it. In manageable chunks, of course. But yeah, really, really nice piece. Well done.
Cool. That takes us to the end. So thanks a million to everyone for submitting. Thanks to you for watching through to the end. If you want to see more of our videos, we do one a month. You can subscribe if you want. If you want to submit your own video, we're a Facebook group. It's open to anyone who wants to improve their own painting. You just have to sign up to there, and there'll be a new event up for this month. It's already up there, so just look for it in the events tab. We look forward to seeing more submissions in the future, and until then, goodbye.